The story continues, where secrets meet honesty, and choices become more than survival, they become the path to love. In the quiet halls of a palace, a young noble must navigate the delicate balance between duty, desire, and the truth that can no longer be hidden. As moments of trust build, and whispers of the past fade, hearts begin to claim what they were always meant to hold. Will courage and honesty finally lead to happiness, or will the shadows of uncertainty linger just a little longer? Find out as the journey reaches deeper, the stakes grow higher, and love unfolds in ways neither could have anticipated. Don't forget to subscribe to Sweet Serenity. The letter was heavier than it looked, not because of its size, but because of the way the room shifted the moment it changed hands, as if everyone present understood that whatever words rested inside it did not belong to the realm of pleasantries. I stood beside my husband, my posture steady, my expression composed, yet I felt the echo of the wax seal before it was even broken, felt it settle somewhere beneath my ribs where calm often lived and unease now lingered instead. Evander did not open it immediately. He accepted it with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything, fingers closing around the parchment with quiet certainty, and for a brief moment, he did nothing at all, as though weighing not the letter itself, but the consequences of acknowledging it. The hall was silent in that particular way only nobles ever managed, where dozens of people breathed and watched and waited without making a sound, and I realized then how accustomed I had become to being observed without being seen. When he finally broke the seal, he turned slightly away, enough that no one else could read over his shoulder, and though his face remained controlled, I noticed the smallest tightening at the corner of his jaw. He said nothing, folded the letter once, then again, and handed it to an attendant with instructions delivered in a voice so calm it unsettled me more than anger would have. Whatever storm had been summoned, he intended to face it privately. We were dismissed soon after, not abruptly, but firmly, and as I followed Evander through the long corridors of the palace, I became aware of how differently the air felt now, heavier, watchful, threaded with curiosity that no one dared voice aloud. Servants lowered their eyes a fraction too quickly, guards straightened as we passed, and somewhere behind us, whispers attempted to form before being swallowed by stone walls and good sense. Our chambers greeted us with familiar quiet, though it felt altered, as if the room itself sensed that something had shifted between the night before and this moment. Evander closed the door behind us with care, not urgency, and for a long breath, neither of us spoke. I removed my gloves slowly, deliberately, because stillness was a language I understood well, and I had learned that rushing rarely led to clarity. "The letter concerns your family," he said at last, his voice even, not accusatory, but not gentle either, and I felt the weight of that statement settle between us like a stone dropped into still water. I inclined my head slightly, acknowledging the truth of it without inviting conclusions. "I assumed it would," I replied, choosing honesty where it was safe and restraint where it was necessary, because I had learned long ago that silence, when wielded properly, could be as powerful as confession. He turned toward me then, his expression unreadable, that single-seeing eye sharp with focus, and I became acutely aware of the fact that Evander did not look at people the way others did. He observed patterns, listened for inconsistencies, sensed what was left unsaid, and in that moment, I wondered how long he had been cataloging the small differences between what I was expected to be and what I actually was. "There are questions being raised," he continued, "not accusations, not yet, but questions have a way of multiplying if they are not answered carefully." I met his gaze without flinching, because whatever fear stirred within me had already decided it would not rule my spine. "And what answers do you intend to give them?" I asked, not because I doubted his authority, but because I needed to understand where I stood in the shape of his intentions. A pause followed, measured and thoughtful, before he replied, "That depends on what you wish me to protect." That, more than the letter, unsettled me. Not the offer itself, but the implication that protection was already assumed, that my place here was not conditional upon convenience alone. I found myself studying his face, the strong line of his jaw, the quiet restraint he carried like armor, and I wondered when exactly this marriage had shifted from arrangement to something more precarious, more human. Later that afternoon, the palace seemed to breathe again, though uneasily, and I took refuge in the outer gardens where stone paths cut through winter-tamed greenery. The cold air cleared my thoughts better than solitude ever could, and as I walked, I considered the life I had stepped into with measured steps and borrowed titles, a life that was now watching me just as closely as I watched it in return. It was there that Evander found me again. Not by sight, I suspected, but by instinct. His footsteps deliberate on the gravel path, stopping just close enough that I felt his presence before he spoke. "You retreat when you are thinking," he said quietly, not as an accusation, but an observation. I allowed myself a small smile at that. "And you notice more than people expect," I reply, turning to face him, veil absent now, my features uncovered and unguarded in the pale light. "For a man who is said to see little," he said, "I have learned to see what matters." The word settled between us, not as a confession, but as a promise of one, deferred but inevitable. We stood there longer than necessary, the space between us no longer filled with uncertainty alone, but with something steadier, something that hinted at trust yet to be fully claimed. That night, as the palace quieted and the world beyond our walls seemed momentarily distant, I lay awake longer than I meant to, listening to the rhythm of a life I had not planned but was beginning, cautiously, to choose. The letter had stirred questions, yes, but it had also revealed something else, something far more dangerous and far more hopeful. For the first time since the vows were spoken, I allowed myself to wonder not how long I could survive this marriage, but what it might become if neither of us looked away. And that thought, more than fear, kept me awake until dawn. Morning arrived quietly, as though the palace itself had decided to tread carefully around whatever had shifted overnight, and when I rose, I did so with the awareness that something between Evander and me had crossed an invisible threshold, not into certainty, but into honesty that could no longer be postponed. The air felt clearer, colder, and I found that I breathed more deeply than I had in days, as if my body understood before my mind did that silence was losing its grip. We broke our fast together, not at the long formal table used for appearances, but in the smaller adjoining room where conversation was permitted to exist without witnesses. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, catching on porcelain and silver, and for a while, neither of us spoke, though the silence no longer felt defensive. It felt deliberate, a pause before words that mattered. "You are being watched," Evander said eventually, his tone careful, but not alarmed, and I appreciated that he did not soften the truth or sharpen it unnecessarily. "Not in a way meant to harm you, but in a way meant to understand you." I set my cup down slowly, meeting his gaze with the same steadiness I had learned to cultivate. "I have lived my life under observation," I reply. "This is simply a grander audience." Something like a smile touched his mouth at that, brief but genuine, and it struck me how rarely he allowed such expressions to surface. "That confidence," he said, "is one of the reasons they hesitate." Later that day, I was summoned to meet with the household stewards and senior attendants, not for interrogation, but for formalities meant to reaffirm my position. And as I moved through the corridors alone, I felt the subtle shift in how people addressed me. There was still curiosity, still restraint, but beneath it was recognition, not of the title I wore, but of the way I carried it, and I realized then that legitimacy was not granted solely by birth or ceremony, but by presence sustained over time. The meeting passed without incident, questions polite and procedural, and when it ended, I found Evander waiting just beyond the doors, his posture relaxed, as though he had not been guarding the space, though I knew better. We walked together through the East Wing afterward, discussing matters of the estate, the harvest reports, the petitions waiting his review, and it felt strangely intimate to be included not as ornament, but as partner, my thoughts considered rather than merely heard. It was during this walk that the conversation shifted, not abruptly, but with inevitability, as though the palace itself had nudged us toward it. "The questions will not stop entirely," Evander said, his voice low as we passed a tapestry-lined corridor, "but they can be answered in a way that closes doors instead of opening them." "And what way is that?" I asked, though part of me already understood. He stopped then, turning slightly toward me, his expression thoughtful rather than severe. "By showing them that whatever they suspect does not weaken this marriage," he said, "that it strengthens it." The simplicity of the statement unsettled me more than elaborate assurances ever could. "You speak as though the choice has already been made," I observed. "I make few decisions lightly," he replied, "and known where my household is concerned." That afternoon, I retreated once more to the gardens, though this time not in search of solitude, but clarity. I walked the path slowly, considering the shape my life was taking, the truth I carried, and the way Evander had begun to treat that truth not as a liability, but as something worth defending. I had entered this marriage prepared to endure it, But endurance, I was learning, was a far cry from living. Evander joined me again before dusk, his presence announced not by sound, but by that subtle shift in awareness I had come to associate with him. We spoke then more freely than we ever had, not of titles or duties, but of upbringing, of expectations placed upon us too early, of the quiet ways one learns to survive scrutiny. There was no confession yet, no grand declaration, but something far more meaningful was taking place, the slow alignment of two people realizing they were no longer standing on opposite sides of a decision. When evening fell, the palace hosted a modest gathering. Nothing ostentatious, but enough to remind the court that unity remained intact. We entered together, not arm in arm, but close enough that our proximity was unmistakable, and as eyes followed us, I felt a curious calm settle over me. Whatever they sought to find, they would find instead a marriage that did not fracture our inner attention. It was only much later, when the halls had quieted and the servants withdrawn, that Evander and I found ourselves alone again, standing near the window where moonlight spilled across the floor. "There will come a moment," he said softly, "when the truth must be spoken plainly, if only between us." I turned to face him fully then, my voice steady, my heart no longer racing at the thought. "I know," I said, "and when that moment comes, I will not hide from it." He nodded once, as though that answer had been the one he was waiting for, and in that shared understanding, something eased, not resolved entirely, but steadied enough to be trusted. As I lay down that night, sleep came more easily than it had before, because for the first time since the wedding, I did not feel like I was merely reacting to events beyond my control. Choices were being made now, careful and deliberate, and I was no longer making them alone. The truth was drawing closer, yes, but so was something else, something warmer, something that promised not just survival, but happiness, if we were brave enough to claim it. The truth arrived not with spectacle, but with quiet inevitability, the way dawn slips into the sky without asking permission, and when the moment came, I realized I had been preparing for it far longer than I understood. It was early, the palace still wrapped in the hush of morning, and I stood at the tall window of our chamber watching light gather along the stone paths below, feeling strangely calm for a man about to step fully into himself. Evander was already awake, I could tell not by movement, but by presence, that familiar awareness settling at my back like a steady hand. He did not speak at first, and for that, I was grateful, because some truths require space before they are spoken aloud. "I have not been entirely honest," I said eventually, turning to face him, my voice even, unbroken, not because I wished to deceive you, but because I was afraid of losing what had not yet been named. He regarded me with that careful attention he reserved for moments that matter, his expression open, his posture relaxed, and when he answered, there was no sharpness in his tone. "Then name it," he said simply, "and we will decide what it means together." So I did. I spoke of the expectations I had been born into, the roles I had learned to wear with precision, the quiet ways I had shaped myself to survive scrutiny without surrendering my core. I told him who I was without the titles, without the ceremony, without the borrowed assumptions, and when I finished, the silence that followed was not heavy, but reverent, as though the room itself understood the significance of what had been entrusted to it. Evander did not recoil, did not question my worth, did not retreat into formality. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, and said, "I chose you long before you chose yourself in this place," his voice low and certain, "and nothing you have said changes that." The simplicity of it ended me more thoroughly than any grand declaration could have. He reached for my hand then, not hesitantly, but with intention, his grip firm and grounding, and in that moment, I understood that love, when it was real, did not demand performance, it demanded presence. Later that day, the palace gathered not in anticipation, but acknowledgement. The rumors had been addressed quietly, decisively, by Evander himself, not with explanations meant to appease curiosity, but with authority rooted in clarity. Our marriage, he declared, stood as it was, not weakened by truth, but strengthened by it, and those who served under his banner accepted that reality with the pragmatism of people who understood power when they saw it exercised with restraint. We walked the halls together afterward, not to prove anything, but because it felt natural to do so, and I noticed how the atmosphere had changed, how whispers gave way to measured respect. I was no longer a figure to be deciphered, but a presence acknowledged, and I found unexpected pride in that transformation, not because it erased my past, but because it honored it. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than imposed. I took on responsibilities that suited my temperament, advising where clarity was needed, listening where patience mattered, and contributing not as an ornament of marriage, but as its partner. Evander sought my counsel openly, valued my perspective without condescension, and somewhere in those quiet exchanges, affection grew into something sturdy and undeniable. There were moments of laughter too, soft and unguarded, shared over late meals and unplanned walks through the gardens, moments where his hand would find mine without thought, where my presence became as instinctive to him as his had become to me. Love, I learned it, did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it simply stayed. The second ceremony was modest by design, attended only by those whose presence mattered, not for politics, but for sincerity. There were no veils this time, no borrowed symbols, only vows spoken clearly, freely, with eyes lifted and voices steady. When Evander spoke my name, my real name, with that same calm conviction he brought to everything else, I felt something inside me settle into place at last. Afterward, as evening light spilled across the courtyard and the last of our guests departed, we lingered beneath the open sky, neither of us in a hurry to retreat indoors. I once believed strength meant standing alone, Evander said quietly, but you have taught me otherwise. And you, I reply, have taught me that choosing happiness is not the same as abandoning duty. He smiled then, not the guarded expression of a duke before his court, but the easy warmth of a man content in his life. And when he kissed me, it was not with urgency or fear, but with certainty, the kind that promised continuity rather than escape. That night, as we returned to our chambers, the palace felt different, not because it had changed, but because I had. I no longer moved through its halls as a role to be maintained or a secret to be protected, but as myself, fully and without apology, and I understood then that the journey which had begun with uncertainty had ended not in sacrifice, but in belonging. I had entered this marriage prepared to endure it. I remained because I chose it, and in that choice, I found love, not as something stolen or hidden, but as something claimed, openly and forever.